Hi, and welcome to Drafting Compliance. I'm Kayne, he's Tom, and we talked about system and communications protection last time. Today, we're talking about the key challenges when first starting the journey to ATO with our special guest, Michael Chaoui. But before we get to that, we have some beers. What are we drinking today, Michael?
Today we're drinking Old Rasputin from North Coast Brewing.
One
It's
of the
a Russian
cooler,
Imperial Stout, and
one
it's
of, yeah,
right here from California.
This
yeah,
guy's got
Fort
quite the beard
Fort
going
Bragg,
on.
California. It's got a
Yes,
very
Fort
cool
Bragg.
bottle. That is Rasputin on the bottle. So
Uh-huh.
one of the original OGs of alcohol consumption, I think. So yeah, North Coast Brewing. I've actually been here. We
Have you?
Yeah, we went out
Oh.
several years ago to the Redwoods, and we drove up the coastal road and we went through Fort Bragg. And I try to stop at breweries, so this is one we stopped at. So I did not have
That
the old
sounds
Rasputin,
delightful.
but
Wow.
Oh.
Sounds fantastic and pretty.
So-
I'm so glad that we get to try this. Tom, have you tried this before today?
I have not, although I've had many stouts. So this is an imperial stout, which generally when something says imperial, it just means it has a lot of alcohol in it. So this hits.
Yeah, I'm clocking this as 9%.
9%.
So this is going to be like our live show. It's going to
Yeah.
be absolute
So
fire.
Tom starts to mix words up at over 7.5%. So this will be fun. All right, let's crack this beer. Let's give it a go.
All right, let's open these up and
Excellent.
see how they go.
It's gonna.
Oh, I smelled it.
All right. Ooh, that's got an aroma.
Yeah,
Chocolate.
Kayne, I think you're gonna like this one.
I can
Let's see,
almost
I like
guarantee
chocolates.
he's not gonna like this one, but doesn't
Okay,
mean
so
we
the
don't
problem
try.
I'm having here, now I've got too much head. The last time I did this with a beer with this much foam, I put my nose in the foam. Oh, but I got it to fit. See, I can be trained.
Yeah.
I can't see a single darn thing.
Oh
through
my
that.
goodness,
It
this
is
smells like a cold winter night to me. I mean, this is amazing.
fantastic. Well, we've got about the right time for this right now, or at least we're starting to get into those cold winter nights.
Gosh, there's vanilla, there's chocolate, both on the nose. Coffee.
I'm getting the chocolate. I'm getting the coffee. Also, maybe what are those things? Caramels? Maybe caramels or like burned sugar.
Burnt sugar,
a
I
bit of that
can
flavor.
get there. Yeah.
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 Man, I'm not going to keep smelling. I'm going to try it.
Yeah. There you go.
All right. Well, let's have a go and see how this is.
Oh, it's sweeter than I would have anticipated. Yeah, this is it's
boy.
got a lot of kind of subtle coffee tones to it. Definitely some chocolate tones.
Oh, it just
Is
keeps hitting.
this a milk stout? I mean, it's definitely sweet. So it's sweet
It's
like
not a milk stout.
Yeah, it's sweet like a milk stout. Maybe not as sweet as some, but
Yeah. This is.
It's kind of like, those baking chocolates that you're not supposed to eat when you're a kid, but you end up eating them out of the.
and then you're
pantry
disappointed that
because
they're not sweet like the chocolate you're used to.
This has kind of got that flavor profile for me of that really bitter baking chocolate that you're not supposed to eat, but it also has. I get the coffee flavor.
Well, it is a
Yeah.
beer cane, so it can't just taste like chocolate. You know, it has to.
Fair. If I wanted
Yeah,
chocolate, I'd have
okay.
chocolate.
Defeats.
The
Can we do chocolate tasting on this show at some point? I think that'd be fantastic.
the denseness of the head is impressive too. I mean, this is you're reminiscent of the Guinness kind of head, but this isn't nitro, which Guinness is nitro. So it
Is this
creates
a
nice-
nitro? It didn't
No.
have the little thing
No,
on
this
it.
is not. No, this is
No.
All right.
Didn't
This
have
is
that little
not
widget
nitro.
in there.
so that's
Well, at least
it's more
it's smaller
impressive
than
that
some
it
of
has
the
that
ones.
foam.
And Michael, you recommended this beer to us for this production, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to take another sip, and then we can probably get started.
Most welcome. Most welcome. It's perfect
Yeah,
for
it's-
winter nights. Like
Yeah.
it really is.
Delicious.
That's not the word I'd choose, but okay. We will get to beer reviews at the end of the show, I promise. But in the meantime, Michael, considering the evolving framework that's happening under FedRAMP, what have been some of the major hurdles that companies face in the initial stages of obtaining an authorization to operate or an ATO?
Well, I can tell you that there are multiple responses from multiple angles on that one for a lot of organizations. First off, is from like an actual like paper point of view.
Mhm.
We're talking about companies that might not. A lot of these companies are startups, or they're startups that have continued onto their journey and they've grown to maybe like 600 employees, 800 employees, maybe even less in
135
a
employees.
lot of
Yep.
cases. Yeah. So
We feel
often,
seen.
right? So oftentimes these are companies that have moved really fast in building their products and getting to market, and they're just everything is moving at such a fast pace
Hmm.
that in order to do that, they're often policy light organizations. And when I say policy light, it means that they don't have a ton of documentation. Um, Everything from policies to procedures to various standards, guidelines, all the documentation that's going to be required as part of that overall package when you
Hmm.
start getting further along your FedRAMP ATO journey. um, get ready to be a little more policy heavy. And so the resulting cultural shift that comes from that transition from those hard requirements can often be quite cumbersome to get through. Oftentimes, you need a lot of support, a lot of really strong support from across your C suite. That
Yeah, and I
needs,
want to definitely get into the cultural things. Just to stop you right there, I know we've got that. I want to tuck into that, but you're saying a lot of policies and procedures just haven't existed. How prescriptive is the FedRAMP or the 3PAO expecting those to be? Is this something where you can just buy a package and customize it for your own organization, or do you have to do what Tom's been doing, which is literally like drafting from start?
it's a mix of both. You could start with like a baseline template that would cover the baseline controls from NIST,
Mhm.
and then you just basically build on top of that and tailor it. Not everybody, it's not a one size fits all necessarily, but you do need to address all the requirements that you're going to be audited against. Um,
Well,
so
I would just add, I would add that the policy piece and the procedure piece are really completely different asks from FedRAMP, right? The
right,
policy piece, FedRAMP is going to help you significantly in terms of how you write those, right? I mean, they're very prescriptive on what the policy has to say, but they leave the
yes,
procedural piece of it wide open. And the procedure is what you're getting audited on from your 3PAO
Mhm.
and from the PMO and whoever else is coming to look at you from the federal side. So it is really difficult for those organizations that you spoke to, Michael, to understand what level their procedures need to be brought up to. And to me, that's where I've seen gaps, pretty significant gaps. Actually, we can get to policy. That's maybe a lighter ask, but the procedure seems like a burden that maybe most aren't prepared to take.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure if a startup's got their SOC 2 and they think, well, we were able to show the auditor a selected set of controls that we were operating, I think they're going to have a bad time with FedRAMP, right?
yeah, I've literally witnessed that. Like, oh, we got through SOC 2 Type 2. FedRAMP should be a breeze.
Oh no,
I've had I'm found in disbelief every time I hear that. It's just like, oh, you'll see.
no.
Um,
Hmm.
but another thing that often that orgs need to take a look out for when they start considering their FedRAMP ATO journey are the federal mandates and some of these extra pieces. So one thing that a lot of companies often miss, at least initially, until someone who is in the space can tell them, is that all right, getting FedRAMP, if you have your eyes on the broader governmental agency space, if
Hmm.
you are trying to go for Department of Justice or IRS or certain DoD agencies or entities, you're going to have another set of requirements that you're going to have to meet. And so they vary between each other. But essentially, with those orgs, FedRAMP being ATO is just getting your foot in the door. And it depends on what ATO level that you're even at to begin with. If you're FedRAMP low, not so much. So that's one thing that folks need to keep an eye out for. There's incident disclosure requirements that are super tight. So if you don't even have an incident response program or a vulnerability management program, you will struggle.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think anybody who doesn't have an IR process and procedure at this point is going to have struggles.
Yeah, I feel like that one
Absolutely,
has sailed out of the FedRAMP harbor and is part of the greater ocean now.
yeah. Especially with like I mean, Kane, I know you've been digging into the whole SEC rule that's come out. Not to detract or derail or anything, but I mean, you cannot run away from IR from not having an IR anymore. No
Right.
smoke,
No,
no more
I
smoke and
don't. I
mirrors.
don't think you can. Although I think Tom has left the harbor with that one. Was Rasputin a sailor? Was that something that he was
I don't
known
think he
for?
was
Was
known as a
nautical?
sailor. No,
No, he was
Okay.
he
more
was
like a
known as
wizard,
yes, somebody who could predict the future.
like a sorcerer or a
Okay.
soothsayer.
Well, that's a good pivot
Ooh.
point because we're sometimes looking at the future and trying to predict it. But Michael, you've talked about some current challenges with FedRAMP and for getting an ATO. How do those challenges really compare with challenges from previous years?
More recently with
Yeah.
FedRAMP.
And we'll talk
Well,
about recent legislation and the OMB in a moment. But how is it? How are we doing compared to previous years organizationally for a lot of organizations?
I think a lot of organizations are still struggling with navigating it. I think the changes that often come with respect to FedRAMP, there's changes that come, and you really have to stay on top of it. So the ongoing compliance, it's not continuous monitoring like what we're talking about for the mandates or any of the other requirements, but this is really what the new draft is calling for. It's around continuous monitoring. It's around having that new technical advisory group come in
Hmm.
is going to be super helpful by offering expertise directly from the government to anyone who is pursuing FedRAMP so that it's more clear. Some of the requirements could be a little nuanced. And it's really hard for a lot of organizations, especially in the private sector in particular, that are trying to go for FedRAMP, really understand how they can stay on top of these evolving changes. Um, and oftentimes they're going to have questions, and the federal government is already difficult for the private sector to navigate in a lot of
That's right.
cases if they've never done it before. um, you know you have to fill out this form, or you have to perform this assessment, or you need to format it correctly. There's not a lot of help that you see from the feds in terms of guiding you in the right
Hmm.
direction.
That's right.
So I think that technical advisory board will be a nice bridge between the federal government and the private sector trying to achieve FedRAMP authorization.
And Tom, this is something we've had previous guests on who've talked about partnering with their 3PAO within ethical boundaries, of course. Is that something that you think would be an appropriate strategy for this?
If you're asking me, it's absolutely an appropriate strategy. Those guys are going to be closer to the pulse of what is changing inside of FedRAMP, but they're also going to understand where sponsors have started to dial in association with new mandates, new guidance, and they're really going to help hold your hand through that process. So if you don't have a good partner there, if you've treated your 3PAO like, somebody you keep at an arm's length rather than somebody who you bring inside the fold, you're doing it wrong. This is where a 3PAO can really, really help speed up your process.
Fantastic. And Michael, now I want to turn to the recent legislation, actually. And we'll put a link to this in the show notes for those of you who aren't following recent legislation and memos out of the federal government. But just looking at that recent legislation and the Office of Management and Budget's draft memorandum, how have the requirements for achieving an ATO really shifted? And what impact would you say that's having on companies that are just beginning their FedRAMP journey?
I think I think what's happened recently with the 3PAO um, level of quality in their audits and that sort of being disbanded, a lot of them have come under fire or under scrutiny, and in a lot of cases, they've even revoked some of those assessments that they've performed for some organizations. I
Hmm.
think they're setting a new standard for, listen, any organizations that are trying to get through FedRAMP by just doing this a very elaborate smoke and mirrors exercise is not going to cut it. I think holding it to a higher standard, um, and setting out those newer requirements, especially around continuous monitoring and maintaining your authorization, is super,
Hmm.
super important. I mean, we're talking about the federal government systems and using different applications and softwares into that. And then with the ever present risk of third party vulnerabilities, and a lot of the incidents happen through third parties, we have an executive order that we need to revamp our cybersecurity posture as a nation. And I think it only will further encourage not only more effective collaboration between the government and the private sector, but it'll actually very firmly convince firmly convince the private sector that, hey, we really need to step it up. And in kind, it might even motivate these organizations to adopt more secure practices in not only their government practice, but in their commercial practice as well, which there's a very deliberate split between those two, and how they try to scope in what security controls are applicable where.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think, Tom, we're doing some of that too, right?
Yeah, we are. I mean, really, the burden of FedRAMP sort of forces you to do that initially. But the way I've always looked at it is the best practice piece of FedRAMP, which is applicable no matter where you sit. That's the golden star you should be reaching for anyway. So we will get commercial space up to snuff. We might have to back off on some of the things that I would consider more just federal requirements rather than best practice. Going back to something you said, Michael, I think is interesting. Is I agree with you 100%. We are seeing some pressure on the 3PAO ecosystem right now, but that draft guidance has some conflicting verbiage in it in terms of just, hey, we've got to get better and we've got to be more precise, maybe from the 3PAO perspective. But hey, we also need to speed things up and find other avenues to get authorizations done quicker, right? And this is a welcome piece of language from the government, because what we've seen really over the last year is a absolute slowdown. I mean, we're talking about creaking wagon wheels here from the government's ability to get people through the process, and anything we can do to speed that up, but certainly not diminish the security posture and the intent of it is a welcome change.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a wrangle still on what exactly they mean by like automating wherever you can. Are we talking about using cloud native security solutions from AWS Gov, for example, or are we talking about something else, or are we even talking about, compliance solutions that would help speed things up?
Well, I know
So
one of
I
those.
think,
Yep.
yeah, I think we all do in this room.
I mean,
Maybe.
the interesting thing there is it follows the playbook of FedRAMP in general, right? Where FedRAMP always says, where possible, automate. It's sort of like a catchphrase that they use on a bunch of controls. They never give the prescriptive nature, and quite frankly, a lot of companies struggle to understand what they actually mean there. What you have to do is remove FedRAMP from your search and go out and search the NIST best practices to see what people are doing to solve those problems, and you'll really quickly figure out what the actual ask is there, because the federal government doesn't want to look biased in pointing to solutions, right?
No, and I could see them completely pointing towards NIST, given that the federal government helps to create and maintain NIST.
Right.
Also, if you're enjoying this conversation on YouTube, ring the bell to get notifications about my quest to find literally any beer that's drinkable, or you can subscribe to this podcast app in your app of choice to make this part of your monthly routine. So, Michael, from your experience, how does the centralized nature of the FedRAMP program really influence the process of obtaining ATO for new entrants in the government contracting space?
So when we're talking about like centralized, you're talking about like the General Services Administration, or
Yeah.
Yeah, for the new entrants in the government contracting space.
Yeah, people who are CSPs who want to obtain an ATO for actually, being able to do business. And in some cases, just do business in a space where it's showing up as a FedRAMP as a requirement in a TPRM, a third-party risk management survey, not necessarily serving an agency.
Yeah. So what I struggled with in the past, or what my team and I struggled with in the past, as far as like centralized, you don't really get too much of there's a lot of stuff to navigate in terms of like, okay, we have the GSA that we have to, who is running FedRAMP essentially, but then there's like these other involved parties. So it depends on if you want to take the JAB route. So if you want to take the JAB route, that's like one. The other one is having a sponsoring agency. So at the end of the day, there is some confusion that you need to get really clear on, not just between yourself and your team, but your key stakeholders as well. Who are we answering to at any given time? So if someone, for example, from the FedRAMP PMO contacts you, or if you're getting a contact with them, you need to know who you're speaking with, versus oh, hey, the deputy CISO has reached out from our sponsoring agency and they have questions as to what the heck is taking so long. um, Dealt with that. That's fun. Um, so I wouldn't necessarily say it definitely influences the process as far as the
Mhm.
centralized nature of the FedRAMP program, but I wouldn't say that it's effectively centralized because it's somewhat fragmented and we're on our own essentially to figure out how to navigate that. So I think having a sort of like info, like some kind of liaison or ambassador of FedRAMP that points any entity that's interested in possibly exploring FedRAMP to go to them and
Mhm.
ask those initial questions about how it really works is a lot different than just having it on your website deep in the trenches of whatever web page vortex you have to go through to find it. I think making it more accessible to entities that are actually interested in exploring FedRAMP would be extremely helpful. I don't feel like it's centralized effectively right
Well, I think that's really smart. I mean, if you look at and you sort of define, is there resources available for FedRAMP? Oh yeah, there's 1,000 of them, and it's all pushed out by a central body. But is there help? No. FedRAMP pushes
Yeah.
out more documentation than you could ever read in a lifetime. Something that you would expect to dig into and take maybe 30 minutes to find an answer will take you 4 hours because the document that you get is 74 pages long when you think it could be 2 or 3 with a diagram, right? So there is a big gap, in my opinion, because of the centralization in terms of the help that you can find from the federal government associated with FedRAMP. So again, the helpful tip for anybody out there who's listening is go and search the same requirement on the NIST side, and you'll find
Hmm.
way more help on that side than you will on just FedRAMP.
And Tom, you're probably, when you're saying NIST, you don't mean NIST CSF, you
No,
mean NIST
853. Yep,
853. Yeah, so just for sake of clarity here, and that's not
wonderful.
800 I know the numbers are very similar, but it's 853 is kind of the rubric I'd use as well for any FedRAMP
That's
requirements.
right.
But also, we've talked about some modernization efforts in that draft OMB memo. Michael, as FedRAMP's undergoing these modernization efforts, how do you see the ATO process is going to evolve for companies? Is it going to get easier? Is it going to get harder? Is it going to stay the same and just they've shuffled people around?
now. I think it's just we'd like for it to get easier. Um, but as far as easier in terms of the process, it could get easier. I mean, when you're sending out these draft memos for public comments, I mean, are people actually going to drop in comments? And are they actually going to listen to them? Um, you, I think if they make it easier for companies to figure things out at the beginning of their journey, kind of like what I was going back to what I was saying, offering them actual help at the beginning of the journey, because that's the biggest pain point. Once you gain some traction and momentum on your journey, you're good.
Yeah.
Once you achieve FedRAMP ATO and you have all the mechanisms necessary to maintain your authorization, you're okay. But that initial part, they can it's really on the government to see how they want to make things easy. From a
Hmm.
process standpoint, like we can help make the process more smooth for organizations. Is a lot different than uh, uh, having new requirements that the organizations pursuing it need to comply with. So it's sort of a two-prong approach. There's the process of achieving FedRAMP authorization, and then there's actually achieving and complying with FedRAMP requirements. Um, so I would say it's at a point now where there will likely need to be more collaboration between the federal government and the commercial sector through that technical advisor group. I think that's what's really. I think it will be a two-way street, in fact, because the technical advisory group will be able to advise the private sector
Hmm.
on how to comply with any new requirements and any other relevant matters, but also it serves as an avenue for the private sector to, give them the on the ground perspective of, okay, well, you're telling us this, but this is really what it is. So that tag is really going to be, in my opinion, I think that's going to be a game changer. But if it's a good or bad game changer is going to be the question,
Well, that's the
and
key,
only time
right?
will tell.
That's the key, right? I mean, I love your optimism, and I certainly share that optimism, but I also have, years of jaded wisdom where the government comes up with good ideas all the time, and then they ruin it with bureaucracy and
Bureaucracy.
layers and layers and layers of people in the middle of it, right? So if we can get to a tag that is absolutely on the pulse of both 3PAOs and the ultimately the innovative companies bringing solutions to their doorstep, that's a nirvana that I cannot wait to get to. But I am probably reasonably dubious that we will get there anytime soon.
Well, I think we've seen these initiatives happen before, and you're right. It's a little too early to say, but I hope that it goes well, given that we're in the middle of a FedRAMP journey ourselves right now.
Yeah, well, the
And I also
one thing I will
go
say,
ahead.
Kane, is we have seen more focus from the Biden administration on improving this process than we've seen since it came out in 2011 or whatever. So the fact that we have some focus on it and we have a administration that understands that we have to be better at this in order to speed up not only the government's adoption of tool sets, but also the maturity posture of security organizations all around the United States, I think that's a good thing. I think it's
Yeah,
an admirable
I
thing.
think we can agree that all organizations becoming more secure is ultimately going to be a good thing. But I want to go back to something that Michael said towards the top of the podcast around culture, and we've talked through a lot of technical fiddly bits. We've talked through controls, we've talked through monitoring. Let's talk about that culture change, though, that you alluded to, Michael. What type of a cultural change is FedRAMP for a smaller CSP, like a startup or like a small business?
Yeah. So the biggest thing would be just overall coordination, getting buy-in from the executives of your startup. Um, the maturity of your actual product says a lot too. So what do I mean by that? Essentially, how do you respond to fixing vulnerabilities? Like that's one thing. If you don't have a vulnerability management program at all, or if you're not at the very least in practice remediating vulnerabilities within those required timeframes. So like high is 30 days, moderate's 90 days, low is 180 days. If you're not doing that right now and you have a massive backlog of vulns on your product, you're going to really struggle. And what that ultimately comes down to from a cultural aspect is it's engineering culture.
Mm-hmm.
You have I've worked with engineers that care deeply about security and they're good about security hygiene. And I've worked with engineers that frankly they just want to ship and deploy as fast as they possibly can. They see security as an adversary rather than as a partner. And so that partnership dynamic between security and engineering is super important. Um, so if you don't have those vulnerability practices down, you're going to really struggle. And getting them to that place where they are okay with engaging with those SLAs as needed, that's a culture shift in and of itself. Um, More broadly speaking, are the departments and the teams outside of security and engineering that are involved at some degree in the government side of the business, which is going to be your legal teams, including your procurement teams. Those have a whole new set of requirements. So if you're a little loosey goosey with, procurement's a nightmare, or you guys take a long time, which isn't even a problem. It's more of how does that process flow, and is legal handling contracts and whatnot. That's another piece where you sort of have to sit down and ask yourself, okay, do we have the appropriate expertise in our organization to handle, like, are our lawyers familiar with dealing with government agencies? If they're not, you might have to invest in hiring additional folks or resources, bringing in certain things, and running a whole new team that is in parallel. So one is focused on commercial, the other one is focused on government. Um, and even with HR, your HR practices might vary differently from your enterprise HR practices. And so,
Mm-hmm.
sort of these nuanced impacts to your organization might actually require some cultural or mindset shifts, and that often is a struggle for a lot of different companies of this sort of profile. Um, and so that's sort of the larger thing. If you have offices, there might be some physical security
Oh boy, yes, that's
controls that
that.
you have to get in place.
That sounds all too
Not just
familiar for
not
me.
just
Coming
maybe.
with manufacturing,
Yeah,
wow, you
most
have to. Yeah,
definitely.
clean desk
Yeah.
policies all the way around.
Clean desk policy. If there's anything where or CAC and PIV
Oh
creds
no,
might have to come
yeah,
into
yeah. Let's all
place.
build ourselves a skiff here. Yikes! You're going through a lot of cultural change things there,
Yeah,
Tom. We're seeing a little bit of that though, like internally inside of our organization, where we really have had to have those conversations with the leadership team, right?
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, if you think FedRAMP is going to only impact your sort of technical teams, you're sadly mistaken, right? This is going to impact your hiring, your onboarding, your offboarding. So HR significant. It's gonna impact your acquisition of hardware, software. So it's going to impact finance. You have to look at your processes end to end and how they cross groups to make sure that they sort of support the requirements of FedRAMP. Ultimately, it becomes an information security requirement at the end of the day, but you are pushing those requirements to those other groups to make sure they meet what's required.
absolutely. And I would even add, like, taking a step back, you could even. My biggest thing is when you have that initial conversation with your executives, it needs to be made absolutely clear that FedRAMP is not like any other framework. This is not something as simple as pursuing SOC 2. This is not something as this is not the same level of effort that's required to go after ISO 27001 or even UK's Cyber Essentials Plus.
No.
Yep.
Or any of
Oh,
these
okay.
other
Yeah,
ones.
the plus ones at least have got some teeth. The other ones are
Yeah, the plus
kind
one's
of
nice,
bush
but
league.
the
Yeah,
other ones are based on self-assessments, and really.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
But in comparison to any other framework, FedRAMP is a monster, and the
That's right.
expectations have to be set with the management, with the with your senior leadership. If they are not on that page, you will get hounded throughout the process. Why is this taking so long? Why is this costing so much? Why do we have to hire more people? Like, give us the navigating that political process is not helpful in the overall journey, and that could actually stall you. I've been parts of teams where we had to go through multiple iterations of how our program was going to be structured and how we were who was going to lead it, who is who, and who is doing what, who owns the FedRAMP program altogether. That oftentimes you'll see a lot of CISOs pushing back on that and saying, "Whoa, this is expanding outside of security. Now you're diving into engineering, you're diving into IT, you're diving into HR. These are all functions that I don't even oversee as a CISO. But if I was a CISO, that is the sort of pushback that would be given. And so navigating those initial pieces all have cultural implications. The culture of the company could influence how those decisions are made and whether they're the right or wrong decisions or good or bad decisions. It's really it's teasing out all of those things before you even sit down with your executive committees.
So ultimately, this is not a bottom-up type security
That's
initiative.
right. That's a really smart
Right, that would
comment.
be absolute- yeah.
I'm gonna let that one hang because Michael, I think you said it all there. That was really smart.
Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I think we are on to our beer review portion of the program. Michael, you recommended this beer.
Yeah, let him go
If
first.
you go first, do you think that's going to influence us?
It
Probably won't influence me.
it
Maybe
won't
it'll
influence me.
Tom. So,
Nope.
all right. So, Michael, tell us what you think of this beer. This is the Old Rasputin by North Coast Brewing Company.
Well, I don't mean to brag about Fort Bragg.
Oh boy,
Had
dad
to.
jokes early.
It's a great beer. It's one of my favorite stouts out there, if not my favorite stout other than Guinness. What's the scale? Out of 5?
It's a 1 to 10. 1 to 10.
1 to 10. Wow.
Yes, if you've watched my videos,
Yeah,
you'll
your
wonder why
previous
there's any numbers
ratings are
above
so
5.
low. I'm seeing like 1s and 2s. I'm like, oh wow,
Yeah.
that must be out of 5.
You'll see me get to
Old
8
Rasputin.
occasionally.
For me, this is a solid 8, 9.
Okay.
Kane, what do you think?
Solid 8.
Cool. What do I think?
Yeah.
So as typical, I tend to sniff these ones at the end. The nose profile, really, the way it smells has not changed. So we've had that happen on the show before, where something smells either really good and then it smells terrible, or something smells terrible and then it smells worse, and I end up investing in air fresheners. And this has pretty much been consistent throughout. I'm going to have another sip of it just to see if the flavor profile has changed. You can tell by exactly how much I've had and exactly how much I'm enjoying this. It's a little better if you let it sit out. I'll say that much. It's not as it's what's the word? Malty. It's kind of like if you were to take uh, malted milk balls. My mother loved malted milk balls. Always had those in the house when I was growing up. I absolutely loathe those. Hi,
I
Mom.
do as well.
And also, if you were to have baking chocolate and combine that, you pretty much get this flavor profile of malted milk with bitter chocolate. I'm just really selling it. So I'm gonna actually, having said that, knowing my scale, and Michael called me out on that one, I'm going to be very generous and give this a 4.
Holy!
And I'm going to give it a 4. And the reason why is I think over the past year of what has been a 3 and what has been a 2, and none of this is not as skunky as any of those 3s. And please, if we could never do the 2s again, I'd be a person.
All right. Well, that's amazing.
Tom, what about you?
So it's encouraging to see you get into the 4 space. I consider that maybe a nod to our ability to bring you new flavors and the growth and maturity in which your palate has gone through over this last year. If we're going by how much you've drank, we'll look at mine. That's what I have left.
Wow.
So I've enjoyed it thoroughly. I disagree with you. The nose on it has opened up quite a bit, so you get some of the sweet in the nose now. You get a little less of the shock of the kind of the cold coffee smell. The flavor on this
You also have less in your glass, though, so
that
I'm
could
sure
be
that
it.
helps it open up a bit more.
I will say that the taste of this surprised me. When I saw Imperial Stout, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be heavy alcohol flavor, maybe a little bite on the backside. This is completely different. It's very sweet. It's extremely malty. So, stouts aren't super hoppy. I think it's really good. So on a cold winter day, I might actually go out and make sure I have an old Rasputin in the fridge going forward. So I'm going to give this, for a stout, I'm going to give this a 7.
For a stout, you're giving it a 7. Is that an overall? Because I don't think we have a separate rating scale, Tom, for like stouts.
Yeah, I mean, what you can't do is you
7?
can't always influence it based upon your very favorite beer. This is a very good stout. So if I were comparing it to would I rather have this or one of my hazy IPAs, I'd pick my hazy IPA still. But on a cold winter night, I will reach for something like this, and this is a good one to have in the fridge.
Fantastic. Well, Michael, thank you for sharing this with us today, and that's all for today. If you think a beer I'd like, or if you have a FedRAMP question, drop it in the comments below, and remember to like our YouTube and LinkedIn pages to hear live interviews with information security professionals. Thanks, everyone.